Hello and welcome to another episode of the Let's Create Roblox series. Today is day 7 and we will be making a conveyor belt and we will be putting that in our area 3. Before we do that, we need to, if you haven't already, we need to move along our kill parts that we just kind of put there to make sure everything is working. Now we can make them behave like actual kill parts, and so things you would do is kind of put them in a way that the player has to jump around or over. So I'm going to make this look like a little bit of a maze. I'm going to make them kind of thick so the player can't just jump over it, and this will make them have to walk on a pretty thin path to get along to the other side. So we'll grab this one and we'll move this one over maybe to the end, and maybe this one can be a little bit small and they can jump over it onto another part of the platform. So I'll move this one over and we'll make it a little bit bigger. And then we'll move this one over and make it a little bigger as well. And then so the user would have to walk around. And then this one can be a little bit thinner and they could jump over it. Okay. And so then once they jump there, then we'll have these moving platforms here. Um, let's take a look and see if all of our moving platforms are moving. And if they are, we can kind of turn the sides invisible. So let's take a look. It looks like they are moving. So I'm going to go ahead and select each of these sides, which I'm holding Alt and Shift, and then we can select each of them. And I'm going to set their transparency to 1 to make them go invisible. And we'll make sure can collide is still false, and we can see that in the properties window. And it looks like all of them are, their can collide is false. And so then we just have these 3 moving platforms. Theoretically or ideally, we would want to make these move along side to side at a different pace, so the user would have to jump and time their jumps. Right now they all kind of move the same, so as long as the user makes it on 1, they can just keep jumping along, but we'll leave that for now. And then we'll jump into area 3, and this is where we'll put our conveyor belt. So we can get started. If we go into our Explorer on the right side, and we can minimize our area 2 if yours is expanded. Mine was. We'll expand to area 3, and all we have here is a checkpoint. So to make this easy, we'll just duplicate this checkpoint. So you can use Control D, Command D, or you can click the duplicate button. So I'll press Control D, and then I'll use the arrows to move it out and make it about a good jumps distance away from the checkpoint. Then we need to rename from checkpoint to something else. I'm going to just call this conveyor. And then I'm going to change its color because this green is kind of the color we're using for our checkpoints. So I'm going to, any other color is fine. I'll do kind of like an off, I don't know, off brown maybe. And then I'll resize it and make it kind of a little hard for the user to have to run all the way across. We're going to make them need to keep jumping. And then the last thing we want to do is make sure it's anchored. And so we can do that by, with it selected, we can go into the properties and scroll down. We'll see those check marks, and anchored is checked, and that's good. We want to make sure it's anchored. And now with it being anchored, it's not touching another part, which is important. We can make it a conveyor with no scripting at all. All we need to do is set the velocity property. So if we scroll up right above anchored, we'll see this velocity, and it has 0, 0, 0. The one thing about velocity is when we set it on an anchored part, well, when you set it on a non-anchored part, when you set velocity, that part will move. When you anchor that part and set velocity, then any part that touches the anchored part will move. And so that's what we expect for our player. When they touch this anchored part and it has a velocity, the player will move. When we move the part that we have set velocity on, velocity will reset. So if you do this conveyor and then you end up moving it later on and your conveyor stops working, just remember to check velocity. Make sure that velocity is not 0. And so when we expand velocity in the properties window, we'll see we have an X, a Y, and a Z. So let's go ahead and change Z from 0 to something like 20. And then we can play. And a faster way, instead of going all the way from the beginning, is to bring your camera right to this checkpoint right above it. And then there's that drop down arrow under play, and we can click play here. And that will drop your player right where your camera is. Okay, so now I'm on this checkpoint. I'm going to jump on this, and I expect it's going to push me to the side. It does. So now the player has to jump. If they just try to run forward, they're going to fall off. So that it makes it a little tricky for the player to get to the next platform, but not too complicated. And 20 seems like a good number because as a player, I can jump to fight the push. I'm not definitely always going to jump off or get pushed off, but if I don't keep jumping, I will get pushed off. And so that's what we want. And so maybe now I will duplicate this, our conveyor, and move it out. And then I'll rotate it. Well, we're going to rotate the way it pushes from the left to the right. And we can do that by changing that velocity to -20. And so now if we do the play here again, which will be right over our checkpoint, when we click play here, now I expect when I run on the conveyor, I'll get pushed to the left. And then when I get to the next conveyor, I'll get pushed to the right. Yep, and now it's working. So now I have to jump the other way. Okay, and then maybe after that, we'll do another checkpoint. So I'll duplicate our checkpoint, and I will move it all the way to the end, and we'll place it right there. And that'll be area 3. If you're not caught up to this, if you don't have the 2 conveyors, go ahead and pause the video, rewind, and get caught up. And then the last thing we're going to do is add some more kill parts to these conveyors to make them a little more difficult. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. We'll take this kill part. Well, actually, we can just add any part we want. It just can't touch. So when we add our kill part, we got to make sure it's hovering a little bit above our conveyors. So we can add the part now. And I'm going to change its color so that it doesn't blend right in with our conveyor to a red, because that's the color I'm using to signify it's a kill part. I'm going to drag this up into area 3. Then I'm going to just drag it up a little bit using the move tool, because we want to make sure it's not actually touching. And then we can scale it to make it, it doesn't need to be so tall. And basically what we're going to do is line the left side on this and then the right side on the other one. And that way it'll be like the user's getting pushed into our kill part. So that one's there. We need to rename it to kill part because that's our keyword, and our script will look for that, and it'll attach the behavior that will kill the player when they land on it. Then I'll duplicate it and I'll move it over to our other conveyor and put it on the other side. And that'll make it a little bit more difficult. So let's finally make sure these 2 parts are anchored. So we can do that by holding Alt, hold Shift, and then click anchor. And then we could actually turn can collide off as well. Kill parts, we don't really expect the player to be able to stand on. We just want them, when it touches them, they'll die. So we'll turn can collide to false. So we can do that by, with them selected, go down in the properties and uncheck that checkbox next to can collide. And now if we press play on our little checkpoint before this area, it's going to push us into the kill parts. So we have to definitely be diligent about jumping. But if we don't want to jump too far, oh, I died. So it makes it a little more difficult. It's not just a conveyor. It's a conveyor that pushes you into a kill part. So that's great. And then we still have our laser walls. If we run through them, our player dies. Okay. Well, that'll do it for this episode. All we did today in day 7 was create the conveyor belts. And in the next coming videos, we will hook up these checkboxes, we'll get rid of that base plate, and we'll publish your game. And that'll be the end of the simple obby. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.